Hello, and welcome to the New Mexico Bureau of Geology and Mineral Resources Informal Lecture Series. I am your host, Phil Miller, and today I have our presenter, Amy Dunn, who will be discussing the topic of metadata. This topic, again, came in from questions that have showed up in these lectures, in these discussions, from the Aquifer Mapping Program. So, Amy, with that, I will let you take away talking about metadata.
Okay, so the first thing is what metadata is. It's data about your data. It's where you can go to find descriptions of the data, the authors, the publisher, the units for numeric entries. A lot of data that you can download online does not have metadata, which is very frustrating. So I'm going to say we should do better. For the geologists working on our state map products, we already have metadata all typed up that I've been working on for months. You will not need to edit anything, but it is there as a resource because we follow the GEMS data model. A lot of it is taken from that, but you can go into our metadata and see where we deviate. One thing I struggled with when writing metadata is what to include and what not to include. Most of our GIS data sets come with an accompanying report. Those reports usually have interpretations and conclusions in them, while metadata is more of a technical description of the data schema and your attributes and analysis steps, but there is some overlap sometimes between the two. So the first thing I want to go over is, I'm going to share my screen. In ArcMap, you used to have this catalog pane on the side, and you could go over here and view the item description and edit metadata here. Phil has had a lot of experience on campus with students where this didn't always save properly. It rarely saved properly. So we have recommended you not use this method. And instead, you would have to come into our catalog and edit your metadata here. This would always save. In ArcPro, you don't have separate pieces of software for that anymore. They're all in one. First thing I want to go over in Pro is some settings in the options here. There is a metadata tab, and you can set the metadata style you want to view your metadata in. The simplest one is going to be the item description. It has very few fields you can fill out, but it is what is required if we're publishing any data to Arc Online or an Arc Enterprise portal. The one that we use is the FGDC metadata. It still includes the item description, but also a lot of other fields that you can fill out. We do this because we follow the GEMS data model, and their tools check our metadata for certain things, and they follow the FGDC metadata style. These other ones I have absolutely no experience with. I know Inspire is European and the ISO ones are international. I have heard the USGS might be moving to ISO, but that's a problem for future Amy to deal with. This checkbox allows your geoprocessing history to be deleted from your metadata. I would probably leave this checked for most people because there is another setting in geoprocessing where you can have all of your geoprocessing operations written to your metadata. For most people, this is not necessary. I would leave that unchecked. If you're doing analysis, I would check this box because then all of your geoprocessing tools that you run are captured in your metadata. And you can go back and look at that and see what parameters you used in different things. So those are the two different metadata settings in Pro. In ArcPro, how you get to editing metadata is pretty similar to how it was in ArcMap. You still have this pane along the side. You can right-click and you can view or edit your metadata from here. You can also go to the View tab and open a catalog view. And I can go into my data and you can view and edit metadata from here. What we would like to recommend everyone do is fill out your metadata to at least the feature class level. So that means you'll have metadata for your geodatabase like this. You'll have metadata for your featured data sets and any standalone tables or rasters you may have. And you'll have metadata for your featured classes. You can even do metadata for your topology and explain any rules you're using. There is another level you can go to that can provide some good information, but it's getting way into the weeds in metadata. When you are editing metadata in this catalog view, you get this group up here on the catalog ribbon. There's a metadata group. Anything you have selected down here, you can just click edit, and that will bring up a separate window where you can start actually editing your metadata. Pin that to the side for now. You can also open up multiple windows at the same time. So I've found this helpful if you need to just copy and paste information from one to another. That is not something that ArcMap allowed you to do. The next button I want to talk about is the import button. This can help if you have metadata existing in another file, you can import it into your data here in Arc. You can do it from other feature classes, XML files, stuff like that. You can also export your metadata to an XML file. And this option will let you choose what style you want to export it as. And it also lets you include all content without your computer name or without any sensitive information in it. I'm going to jump down to the bottom and go to Save As. It's similar to export, but it lets you choose a different format like HTML. It also lets you do a metadata template, which would be good for an organization to have that would allow you to use metadata that applies to everything. We do not have one right now, and that is something we've kind of talked about, but all of our data might be so different that it doesn't make sense to have that. You're going to have to go in and edit your metadata for your specific data. And this does not let you choose what format you want it in either. So you can't choose FGDC or ISO or any of those formats. Sometimes when you download data, you will get a warning over here in this preview that says you can't view the metadata and you will need to upgrade it. You can upgrade FGDC or ISO data to ArcGIS format metadata. Everything in ArcGIS must be in the ArcGIS format. It converts it for you when you bring stuff in. But those FGDC and ISO styles are just a different way to view the ArcGIS metadata. Synchronize is something you can do usually kind of at the end of your project. When you have all your data done, you can hit this synchronize button and it will update all of your metadata for you with the number of features that are in it, the extent of the metadata, the spatial reference system. Whenever you go in to edit metadata and stuff like that does not update automatically. You have to hit this button if you've changed anything. This button no one else will have. I've downloaded this as a separate download, but it lets me clear the geoprocessing history from the metadata, which just kind of cleans it up a bit, but no one else needs to worry about that button. So for actually editing metadata, I'm going to come back out to the database level and click the edit button. The first thing you see is the item description tab. This is the only thing you will see if you use the item description style of metadata. Since I'm using FGDC, I have all these other options down here on the left. But this is kind of the main thing we would need to fill out. So I have a title here, and you'll notice the title does not match my geodatabase title. In most cases, it will match the name of your feature class or feature data set, but you can put in a more descriptive title here. The next thing you would need to do is thumbnails. You don't need to do them. They're optional. We've never really bothered with them that much. But you can use this update button to browse to your computer for an image. There's a couple different formats that are accepted. You can use JPEGs, GIFs, PNGs, but Esri says they will convert it to a JPEG anyway. So you might as well just use a JPEG. And it needs to be 200 by 133 pixels. You can use this button to go get images from your computer, like a logo or a project-specific image. That's useful for things like tables, which don't have any geographic data you can view. But if you want to make a thumbnail that actually represents your data, you need to go to the Geography tab, and it gives you a preview of your data here. You can zoom and pan around and align it how you want it. You can go to this Preview tab up here and turn the base map off or choose a different base map, and then you just click Create to create the thumbnail. The warning I got is an error in ArcMap. I'm not quite sure what this means. I haven't quite looked into it yet, but all I found that it is a bug. And it doesn't really matter that it's transforming my data for just making a thumbnail image. Tags are something that is used in Arc Online for searching for data. In Arc Online, the search functions will search all of this item description for different terms. So you don't need to repeat terms that may already be in your title or in your summary. But you should create unique and logical tags to be able to identify items when people are searching for that. The next big thing is the summary. The summary is the purpose of your data, or why was it captured. At this database level, I have the Bureau's mission statement in here, because that explains pretty well why we're creating geologic data. And then ArcMap, ArcProFroze. The description is that it should be a description of what your data is. And we have a lot of information at the database level. It tends to get less information the deeper you drill down into the database. Down here on the bottom, we have the credits. We just put in the Bureau and New Mexico Tech. There is another place that you can put in specific authors. And then we have use limitations, which for us just says you must include a citation if you're going to use our data, but you can put in legal constraints here, stuff like this is for educational purposes only, stuff like that. This scale range, you can slide these sliders back and forth to give people an idea of the appropriate scale your data should be used at. It is very generic, so most of our maps are 24,000, but we do this 500,000 down to 5,000 to encompass that and all the 100K and 62,500 maps that we're doing as well. The bounding box we have set in our database to just be the latitude and longitude that encompasses New Mexico. We can go in here later and edit this down to the quadrangle level, but at least these values are not wrong. This extent contains the resource checks box, means that all of your data in GIS is within these bounding coordinates. Most of the time this will be true, but we have things like our cross-section and our correlation of map units that don't really have a spatial location, but we build them in GIS anyway. They're both built at the 0, 0 point of our coordinate system, which is somewhere in the Pacific Ocean. So in those cases, I have this unchecked because even though the data pertains to New Mexico, it's not actually within New Mexico's bounding coordinates. There are a lot of other tabs along this side that you can fill out. I have not looked at all of them. There's a lot of them that we don't do. A few that we do, though, are this contacts manager has a list of all of our authors. And then in citation contacts, you can load them in. So this is where you can add specific authors for the maps. And you can assign each author a role, such as author. We can make the bureau the publisher. And there's a whole bunch of different options in here. In the citation tab, we do fill out the dates stuff was created and published. You can do version numbers with the date. You can do series numbers. You'll notice when you're filling out FGDC metadata that you get these red warnings at the top, and that is because FGDC requires this. We fill some of this out because the USGS requires it when they validate our GEMS databases. I don't think I've ever filled anything out in the metadata tab, but you can add specific contacts here if you wanted to. In the details tab here, you can put the specific map scale that your data is intended for instead of just using that slider. We add points of contact in here for our maps because the USGS requires that. Most of these other ones I don't use except for this one. And I'm gonna get out of the database level. The fields tab lets you add attribute level metadata. So I can expand this, and it takes a while. This is all the attributes in the table for the contour lines feature class, and you can expand each one and give it its own description. I'm not going to go into detail what all of this means because it's a lot. But you'll see these red boxes here because FGDC requires at least these two fields to be filled out. This is a great place to describe what units, if you have a numeric field, what units you're using. If you have a field that's been calculated, how you reached that calculation. I've just started filling this out, so that's why some of these are blank because I don't have them done yet. But for map kits this year, you will be able to come into some of these and see metadata, especially where we deviate from what GEMS wants. I think that's pretty much it for actually filling out metadata. A couple other topics I wanted to talk about was other data formats. Layla had a question about KMZ files. When you open KMZs in Google Earth, you can go to the properties and all you get is a description box that you can type stuff into. You do not get all of the FGDC level metadata that is provided in ARC. When you export like these contours from ARC into a KMZ, it does come over with the description field, but not every piece of metadata that you may have filled out. When you import this back into ARC, it comes over with nothing. So the metadata between ARC and KMZs is not great. I would not recommend using KMZs other than to very quickly share data back and forth like internally. If we are serving these to the public, you should fill out something in this description box. But the transition from ARC to Google Earth does not make that easy. Shape files, if you deal with shape files, if you look in File Explorer, you can see that shape files actually come with multiple files. The metadata file is going to be a .xml file. And sometimes you will need to use that import button to import that XML into data you've already loaded into ArcGIS. When you're downloading data from other sources and you need to include it in your analysis or in your deliverable, those authoritative sources should be the people who are filling out their own metadata. That is not always the case, but at minimum, we should be putting in where we got the data from, so who the authoritative source is, what date you downloaded it or acquired it would be helpful. But we, as part of our geologic map databases, do not include stuff like that, like the topo data, in our deliverable to the USGS. It's kind of like giving their own data back to them. And there's a couple other reasons that we don't include it as well, but we do include it in our map packages that we provide on our own website. And this provides spatial context for users and more closely matches our static PDF layouts. But that would depend on your contract and what you want to do with your base map data and your data that you use for analysis. If it's not ours, I would hesitate to share that out as if it was. We need to make sure people know where to go for the authoritative source on that data. A few other points I wanted to make were kind of just best practices for editing metadata. You should kind of do it as you go along, especially if you're doing analysis. If you do a step, go into your metadata and record what you did. It's much more helpful to do that than to do it all at the end and try to remember what you did. It's also good to edit all your metadata at the end of your project. Especially the synchronize button, which updates the number of features you have. That's all going to be done at the end. I wanted to mention that I've been talking mostly about the metadata for your data, but you can also do metadata for your maps, layouts, and layer files. So in a map, you can go into the properties of any layer and there is a metadata tab. This one currently says the layer has its own metadata, but I can also make it pull from the data source, which changes what's in here. Because this is the layer and not the data itself, this could be where you describe any specific symbology or labeling that you want to do, but we do not usually go to that level of detail. Usually pulling it from the data source is fine. For anyone who may be watching this video later, you'll notice that generic points talks about the geologic map feature data set. That was an error on my part when I drug this data into the map. So it picked up the data set level metadata. If you drag in the appropriate feature class, like I did here with cartographic lines, it is actually pulling the cartographic lines feature class metadata. Your map also has properties where you can edit your metadata. And also your layout has the same properties where you can edit some metadata. And in ArcMap, this is where we would put in a lot of the information on our layout and pull it in as dynamic text. Currently in ArcPro, I do not have an authors field, which ArcMap had, so we can't pull in authors dynamically. But we're working on a workaround for that. And I just wanted to show you some resources here from Esri. Esri has a lot of websites for editing metadata. There's a lot more detailed information. They have an illustrated guide to FGDC metadata. They have a creating and managing FGDC metadata website, and FGDC themselves has this website where you can go to find out what they mean by different metadata things. There's this short description of it. And I believe that's all I have to cover, and we can go through any questions.
Hey, Amy, could I
Yeah.
have you go back to the FGDC metadata standard for the geodatabase proper?
For right here, just edit this.
Yes, please.
Okay.
Okay, so one of the things that I kind of wanted to mention, and it's one of the things that we don't have to deal with here in the Bureau, and Amy mentioned that we don't edit the maintenance in the metadata. And the maintenance is if you had like a weekly, monthly, yearly, or whatever cyclic nature to editing the data, you could put in when those updates are happening. So that is kind of what that maintenance is for, is if you were doing a infrastructure project and you were installing a water main or something like that. You could update the metadata for that as the project goes on, or if you have an annual thing like the PLSS data set or a county level land ownership data set, the maintenance probably has some cyclic contract that it's required to be updated. So you could then put in there when it was updated and when the next update happens so that, if you were waiting for like a week or something like that for the data to come out, you could wait a week and have that newest data set when it comes out. And yeah, along the lines of what Amy was talking about, there's a lot of things in FGDC that are it's dense with information, and you'll notice that a lot of them are checked off, and the ones that are checked off means they meet current standards for what are put in. The ones that have the red X's, they don't have all of the fields that are required to fill in for them. So I just wanted to mention what the maintenance was for. And again, my recommendation, sort of like Amy said, is just if you need to fill out this level of data, go read and figure out what you need to fill out. And I'd like to reiterate also for the mappers, when it comes to the geologic map databases that you submit to us, don't worry about the metadata. We'll take care of it for you. But the comment that I want to make for the other programs in the Bureau is we should probably sit down and have a discussion about what the metadata is, or like I know Dan is filling out his own metadata for some of the aquifer mapping programs, projects that they're working on. That is great. There is nothing wrong with that whatsoever. And we should be filling this out to the best of our abilities. As much as we can, we should get as much metadata information in there. So it's one of those things where it's kind of a use case scenario. And Amy and I were talking about it just before the meeting of, well, should we come up with standards? And there's like a couple of ideas that we could do, but it gets so, as Amy said, in the weeds of the details of what is being captured in the metadata. Um, yeah, so I just wanted to mention, there are things in here that we're glossing over, and I kind of wanted to reiterate as well for the other programs. This is me as the GIS Services Program Manager right now. I'll put that hat on and wear it proudly and make the statement, bare minimum, please fill out item description. Please, please, please. So that's all you fill out. To my recollection, that is great. I feel like filling it out to this level is the best case scenario. This is extremely detailed and well documented what everything is in the geodatabase itself. When it comes to item description, you can drive down into, Amy, correct me if I'm wrong on this, you can drive into featured data set level and edit the item description. And I
Feature
believe feature class?
class level.
Feature
Yeah.
class level? Okay. So you can drive down to the feature class label. Bare minimum, please fill out item description for the geodatabase itself. Please fill out item description for featured data sets. I would love if people would fill out what each feature class item description is as well. Your contract should dictate that more than anything. But as a best practices, again, if we're finishing up with best practices, please fill out item description for geodatabase, feature data set, and feature class. That would be my preference, so that we're publishing good quality data and giving it that authoritative level of discussion point so that it's well documented what we did, what the data represents, and what it should be used for. So that's the only comment I wanted to make. So Amy, go ahead.
Since you mentioned Dan, I did also want to mention that you can do metadata with Python programmatically. I do not have a lot of experience with this, but it does exist. And I just wanted to make sure that people knew about the Python module. My method for entering and editing metadata was to do it in Microsoft Word because it was easier to spell check and edit there and then do a lot of copying and pasting.
So I think we can open this up to the group now. Are there any questions regarding metadata and anything specific that you have questions on?
Yeah, I got a few questions. I don't know if this is probably the best question to ask in relation to mappers, but it had to do with the publisher, the originator, all that. Is that an appropriate? Is this the appropriate place to ask those questions about who is what? Because I remember we had changed it as far as who the, like the what is it? The custodian, point of contact. No.
Those are specific to an organization.
Okay.
So, there are roles that are required, and we had to modify the roles from what I had set up previously. You're experiencing a flaw in my methodology, so you're asking a question about something that I did incorrectly early on.
Okay.
So answering your question when the metadata will be filled out for authors is kind of irrelevant. If we want to answer that afterwards, I'm happy to answer that afterwards.
That's
I
fine.
messed that up early on. I didn't understand the requirement for FGDC metadata for GEMS, and we're so in the weeds now because we're not talking about metadata. We're talking about metadata for New Mexico Bureau of Geology maps for the geologic map program that meet GEMS requirements that will be submitted to the USGS.
Okay.
So it's like way in the weeds. And so let me do this. What is the confusion that you want cleared up?
Oh no, it was about, who are we defining as the, I gotta pull it up exactly.
I've got it up. Like,
Yeah.
there's authors, there's publishers. I know we've used custodian before. I don't think we've really used a lot of these other ones, but PI, I think we've used.
Yeah.
The author is the authors.
Yes.
So let's use what recently got shared on Facebook, the Los Alamos 24K scale 30 by 60 sheet of the Los Alamos area. Sherry is an author on that, correct? Fraser Goff is an author on that. So they get authorship title. When it comes to the publisher, that would be the New Mexico Bureau of Geology and Mineral Resources. That is who the publisher is. What is tricky and is really frustrating is I think originator is required in here. So the originator is the Bureau of Geology. So there are a few things that we need to create that fit that role, but you can, because we already have the New Mexico Bureau of Geology, we can call them the publisher and we could call them the originator. It doesn't require a PI, but if we needed to, we could put down, and I think Mike was the PI on that state map contract. We could put in Mike as the PI, principal investigator. The principal investigator as that point of contact for the contract. But that is more specific about the contract than it is about the data itself. So why do we need to report out when we're sharing out our data who the PI was? Most people do not really have that level of interest in the metadata of that. They want to know more about the data itself. And I am correct. It is originator, right, Amy? Originator is required?
I think so. And I think, that's a GEMS requirement. That's something that comes up. when we validate our GEMS
Right.
databases. And I know recently with that, we've put in multiple points of contact for our maps because some of our maps have multiple authors. And that throws us an error that we have more than one. I'm like, yes, you can have more than one author. That's okay.
But it's GEMS that throws the error, not the
It's
metadata
GEMS.
throwing
Yes,
an error.
it's
GEMS throws
GEMS
the error.
that throws the error. And in recently talking to them, they're like, you can ignore that error.
The other thing I want to talk about as well is the custodian field, the custodian role. Sorry, the custodian role. At some point, I am going to make a non-person entity (NPE) email for the GIS services program because I don't know about you, but I'm going to retire at some point. And when I retire, having me as the custodian of the data just doesn't make sense. So we need to sort out the 30, let's do 60 years from now. Someone gets a hold of this data, they need to be able to contact someone. If I'm alive in 60 years, that'll be a miracle. So having my contact information in there as the custodian of the data so that they can contact us about errors or questions or problems or anything like that, it'd be bad. But we want some entity that they can roll back to so that when the Bureau gets those questions 60 years from now, we can have a NPE, a non-person entity email that goes to a group of people within the program so that that program can continue answering these questions on the legacy of this data.
Bill, question.
Yes, sir.
Given that email systems and email addresses and all that are constantly changing, I get your point, but should we come up with some kind of point of contact or contact info that's a bit more permanent than an email group?
That's where the publisher comes in because the publisher is the New Mexico Bureau of Geology and it has our address. No matter what we talk about in this scenario, Mark, is the Bureau going to move? What if the Bureau moved to Albuquerque? What if the Bureau moved to Santa Fe?
There goes the neighborhood.
So there are all of the issues of discussing this. No matter what, we need to make it to where it's as generic as possible, but where people can still get a hold of us. Do phone numbers change? Do zip codes change? Do area codes change? All of this is known, but we need at least a couple of these so that people can get a hold of us at one point or another with the deep understanding and recognition that 60 years from now, New Mexico Tech, New Mexico Bureau of Geology legislature can dictate where we move to. So because we are that type of organization, those things can change. And I distinctly remember when we went from 505 to 575, there's still maps where the metadata says 575 or 505. Going through and changing that is not the most effective use of our time, but it does say New Mexico Bureau of Geology is the publisher, and at least 801 Leroy Place is still true. On a long enough time scale, all of those things will be inaccurate. How long ago was it that the Bureau was New Mexico Bureau of Mines and Mineral Resources? Some of our publications have that in the metadata. It's one of those tricky points of information. We're trying to do the few. It would be bad to put my email address in there, right? We just recognize that that's bad. At least putting an NPE email gives us a shot at retaining that email. So yeah, point well taken. Absolutely. But there's only so much we can do because how do you point at an organization whose name can change? Whose funding source can change, whose physical address changes. I mean, how many consulting agencies have to update their metadata on a regular basis because, you know, the lease comes up for a building and the rent is due and it's 5 times more expensive than it was. Well, you move to another building. Well, now all your addresses for the metadata that you've published for years are out of date. You'd almost have to have an entire person's job to be nothing but going through and editing that metadata on a continual basis so that you can get through all of those data sets or setting up a script that does it for you or some of those types of things. So I want to thank you all for participating. Thank you for joining the Informal Lecture Series. I am uncertain as to the specifics of next week's topics, but my leaning is probably going to cover topology. I need to come up with a good data set, geodatabase, and map that's got topology errors so we can kind of cover some of the nuance of topology that we work on. So tentatively, let's say that the next session's informal lecture series topic will be topology. Thank you very much for participating, and we will see you all in the next session.